Did you know that people used to think life forms came from pieces of rotten meat? Way back in the 1600s, people observed maggots crawl out of a piece of meat left outside to rot, and concluded that rotten meat is the source of life. Those who made this conclusion popularized the idea to others, who simply took it for granted and did not see proper evidence to prove it. It was until one day, where someone gathered evidence through a scientific method, that we know the only reason why maggots came out of meat was because flies laid eggs on them. Stuff like this happens all the time, and we call them cognitive biases. Cognitive bias, wow, a big word. A cognitive bias is a mistaken reasoning, holding on to one's preferences and beliefs, regardless of contradictory information. One of the most famous examples will be the bandwagon effect that we learned in history class. People tend to do or believe in things because the majority of the population is also doing it or believing it. Over the years, psychologists have done countless experiments to try to prove the effects on cognitive bias on the decisions people make. Let's hand it over to the experts to tell us more about the two most famous experiments on cognitive biases. By the way, I'm the expert. Eons ago, in a mythical, faraway land known as the United States of America, lived a deceptive, mad scientist.
A psychologist, Solomon Asch. So in 1951, Solomon Asch devised an experiment to see how the social pressure from a majority could cause a person to conform.
Basically, one volunteer was put into a room with several other people, who they thought were other volunteers.
But those people were actually partners in crime of the experiment supervisor. The main part of the experiment was basically a test. The participants were shown a picture of a line and then presented with an array of other lines. Their task was to match the line in the picture with a line of the same length amongst the options given. The thing is, the so-called partners in crime were actually instructed by the experiment supervisor to choose a specific answer.
Usually, the obviously wrong answer.
The results showed that 1/3 of the volunteers conformed to the majority, choosing the answer that was wrong, simply because everyone else chose it. On the other hand, when just one other person chose the correct answer, the volunteers ended up choosing, you guessed it, the correct answer.
One of the most controversial experiments was Stanley Milgram's Milgram experiment, which sought to understand why those on trial at the Nuremberg trials carried out acts of genocide. The Nuremberg trials sought to implicate Nazis who killed countless Jews during the Holocaust. Volunteers were recruited to play the role of a teacher and student. The teacher was instructed to give an electric shock to their student every time they made a mistake in answering a question. The electric shocks were of increasing strength, and the experiment only stopped when the volunteer administered a 450-volt shock to the student 3 times, or when the volunteer refused to continue. The volunteers were encouraged by psychologists to continue the inhumane torture for as long as they wished. Now, what the teachers didn't know was that the student was a paid actor who probably received a sizable sum of money to pretend to be electrocuted. Milgram originally hypothesized that only 10% of volunteers would obey the orders and electrocute the student 3 times. However, to his horror, 65% of volunteers continued giving shocks till the very end, despite the students' escalating agony and even feigned deaths.
Now, you may be thinking that you'd never fall for this, that you'd be the one to rise up, to speak out against the impregnable wall of the majority. Well, we're sorry to break it to you, but that's just not the case.
Cognitive bias says that we deal with evidence and select beliefs rationally when dealing with pressure from others. But there are ways to mitigate this. For example, we can seek what is called a scientific truth. This means we should think logically, exploring information from a range of perspectives before coming to a final judgment. This technique is called Bayesian reasoning. The first card we draw is a red ace of diamonds, which doesn't really tell us much as it is only one card out of 52. The next card we draw is a red 2 of diamonds, increasing the probability of the next card being red and having diamonds, but only ever so slightly as it is only 2 cards out of 52. However, the third card we draw is a 4 of hearts, but is still red. If we continue drawing red cards, it increases the likelihood of the next card also being red, and might suggest that this deck of cards contains a disproportionate number of red cards, or it isn't a full, proper deck. You might think that the scientific method applies strictly to science experiments, but actually, its applications are deeply rooted in many aspects of our decision-making process. To have more control over our thinking, we must make ourselves aware of the cognitive biases. Be brave to express your ideas. Always remember, I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. You're welcome.